Welcome back, everyone, to our weekly discussion of the Haftara. This week's Haftara, it would have been more obvious to us that it was the completion of a series on the Mishkan / the Beit Hamikdash, except we got interrupted first by Parshas Zachar, then by Parshas Para, and so it's less obvious. But I'm saying it's a fact that there is a series of regular Haftarot that deal with the construction of the Beit Hamikdash, and our Haftara for Parshas Pekudei is the last of them. The Haftara is found primarily in Perek Chet of Melakhim Aleph. It starts really in Perek Zayin at the very end, and it's the culmination of this series of Haftarot. Now, being that it's from Nevi'im Rishonim, from Melakhim, the Haftara, the language is very accessible, and the ideas are also. They're familiar to us, and I want to assume that people have the basic knowledge of the Haftara, and we'll do a lot of it obviously ourselves, but I want to deal with specific issues within the Haftara that I think most of us would think about, and almost all of them require, more serious dealing than we'll have time to do with today, but we'll raise them as we go along. Let's start with the first pasuk in the Haftara. The pasuk says, Vatishlam kol hamelacha asher asa hamelach Shlomo Beit Adonai, vayavei Shlomo et kadshei David aviv et hakesef et hazahav et hakelim natan ba'otzrot Beit Adonai. It's really a kind of interesting thing why the Haftara goes out of its way to make the point that Shlomo HaMelech did not take advantage of all the spade work, all the preparatory work that David HaMelech had done for the Beis HaMikdash. We all know that it was David HaMelech's greatest wish to build the Beis HaMikdash, but God turned him down for reasons that we'll see in a few minutes. So instead, David does all the work, all the preparatory work, all the raising of the funds, all the raw materials and things like that, so that Shlomo, when he takes over, can build the Beit HaMikdash immediately. Right, and so David gathers all the raw material and all the donations and does everything he has to do so that Shlomo can do it immediately. But then the Haftara goes out of its way to point out that Shlomo did not use the funds that his father had collected. And say the psukim in Divrei Hayamim, Vayomer David lichnos et hagerim asher be'eretz Yisrael vayamed chotzvim lachtzov avnei gazit livnot Beit HaElokim. Right, David HaMelech got all these workers to work on the Beis HaMikdash, u'bazel larov lamismarim l'adaltot hasharim, etc., va'aseh arazim la'in mispar, ki aviu hatzidonim v'hatzorim atzeh arazim larov l'David. And now that last piece there in Divrei Hayamim Aleph Perek Chaf Bet. Vayomer David, Shlomo b'ni na'ar varach. Right, Shlomo, my son, is young. V'abayit livnot l'Hashem להגדיל למעלה l'shem l'tiferet l'chol ha'aratzot. And the house he has to build is enormous. The Beis HaMikdash was, I don't want to say the biggest building project ever at the time, but it's enormous. Achina nalo vayachen David larov lifnei moto. And so David did all the preparations so that Shlomo could just slide in and build it. So why is it that David HaMelech himself didn't build the Beit HaMikdash? And these are hard psukim to read because we love David HaMelech. But says the Navi, and the psukim come from Divrei Hayamim, the Aleph, Perek Chaf Bet. Vayomer David li Shlomo bini. Ani hayam levavi livnot bait l'shem Adonai Elohai. Right? I wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash. Vahi alai dvar Adonai lemor. Dam larov shafachta umilchamot gidolot asita. Lo tivne bait lishmi ki damim rabim shafachta artzo lefonai. Right? It's hard to read. God says to David HaMelech, you killed a lot of people. You're going to be known for having been a great warrior. But a warrior can't build the Beis HaMikdash. Hine ben nolad lach hu yeh ish menucha v'hanichoti lo mikol oivav misaviv ki Shlomo yeshmo v'shalom v'sheket etein al Yisrael biyamav. But you'll have a son, Shlomo. He'll get to build the Beis HaMikdash. Hu yivneh bayit lishmi v'hu yeh li debein v'ani lo la'av v'hachinoti kisei malchuto al Yisrael ad olam. Right? I'll establish your house as the ruling home of Israel forever. Now, let's not misunderstand. David HaMelech did nothing wrong. God forbid, this isn't a statement that he committed war crimes or did anything like that. David HaMelech did exactly what he was supposed to do, and I would say exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to do. Okay, but there are different roles. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, the person who fought all the wars and the person who did what was necessary to do to defend Am Yisrael and to make them independent, such a person cannot be the person who builds the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash stands for something different. And it is something we should get used to, the idea of different roles in Am Yisrael. He's a Rosh Hashiva. He's a general, right? Both are important. Both are necessary, but they're different paths. So now let's come back to the question we asked. We asked why Shlomo HaMelech did not take advantage of all the raw materials that had been left for him by David. Now, if we follow the Ralbag and the Abarbanel, and mostly Rav Meidan, who raised these issues for me, we can say that just like God didn't want David HaMelech to build the Beis HaMikdash, Shlomo intuited, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but Shlomo intuited that God wouldn't want him to use the spoils of those wars. Almost all the stuff that David HaMelech had, he got from victories that he led over, our neighbors. So, it's a little insulting to David HaMelech, and we'll come back to this point, because David HaMelech is not just a person who had a dream of building the Beis HaMikdash. David HaMelech, as we just read in the Pesukim in Divrei Hayamim, is a person God promised his son would build the Beis HaMikdash. In a way, when you ask yourself who built the Beis HaMikdash, the answer is not Shlomo HaMelech. The answer is David HaMelech's son. He built the Beis HaMikdash because he was the son of the person who wanted to. It's a very, very complicated point that we'll come back to, but let's leave it for now and move on to another interesting thing. Says the Haftara, Oz Vayakhel Shlomo et Ziknei Yisrael et kol Roshei Hamatot Nisiei Havot Livnei Yisrael el Hamelech Shlomo Yishalayim La'alot et Aron Brit Adonai Me'ir David Hitzion. When Vayikahalu, that word again, Oz Vayakhel Vayikahalu el Hamelech Shlomo Kol Ish Yisrael B'yerach ha'eitonim b'chag hu ha'chodesh hashvi'i. They came on Sukkos. Right? Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael vayisua konim et Aaron. That's when they came. And the word Vayakhel, which is not that common in the Torah, keeps coming up. And obviously it keeps coming up for a reason. It reminds us of the Psukim in Parak Lamed Aleph at the end of Devarim. Vayitzav Moshe otam le'mo miketz sheva shonim b'moed shnat hashmita b'chag HaSukkot Bevo kol Yisrael leiraot et pnei Adonai Elohecha b'makom asher yibchar tikra Torah hazot neged kol Yisrael ba'oznehem. What do they have to do? Hakel et ha'am ha'anashim v'hanashim v'hataf v'gercha asher b'sharecha l'man yishmeun u'l'man yilmedun v'yaru et Adonai Elohechem v'shamu la'asot et kol divrei Torah hazot. The mitzvah of Hakel, the mitzvah of gathering all of Klal Yisrael together at the end of a Shemitah year, and reading certain parts of Sefer Dvarim, and having some public Kriyat HaTorah, and something that every Jew can attach himself to. Obviously, that takes place Motzei Sukkos in every Shemitah year, and Shlomo HaMelech's dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, even though it happened slightly before Sukkot, right? It's described by the Navi as having happened on Sukkot. Now, it would be great if we had a pasuk that tells us that when Shlomo dedicated the Beit HaMikdash, it was the end of a Shemitah year. Then we would know that the word Vayakhel and Vayakhilu that Shlomo uses really means to hint to the mitzvah of Hakel. But we have no such proof. Nevertheless, Rav Meidan suggests that it's true. We have a chiyuv to read the Parshos of Devarim during Hakel every Shemitah year. But that's a minimum, he said. He said there's nothing wrong when something significant happens in the history of Am Yisrael to read the Psukim and to gather the people anyway. Maybe it's not technically the mitzvah of Hakel, but we could read Hakel, we can get together, and we can build a big stand in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Melech or the Nasi can read the Parshos. Maybe that's what happened in our Psukim. Okay. Let's move on and ask a fundamental question. How did Shlomo HaMelech furnish the Beit HaMikdash? Who's kelim? So it says the Haftara, Vayakhel Shlomo v'chol hakahol imol. I'm sorry, not the Haftara. This is from Divrei Yom Bet. Vayakhel Shlomo v'chol hakahol imol labama asher b'givon ki sham haya oel moed ha'elohim asher asam Moshe eved Adonai b'midbar. That's where the actual oel moed was of Moshe Rabbeinu. Aval Aron ha'elohim ha'ela David mikiyat yarim behechin lo David ki nata la'oel b'Yishalayim. As it happens, the Aron Kodesh had already been brought to Yerushalayim by David HaMelech, and he built a tent for it and was sitting in that tent. Right? Umizbach ha'nechoshet asher asa B'tzalel ben Uri ben Chur sam lifnei mishkan Adonai v'yisheu Shlomo v'hakahal. Right? Literally, it's our parsha. Who built the Mizbech ha'nechoshet? B'tzalel ben Uri ben Chur. Vayal Shlomo sham al mizbach hanechoshet lifnei Adonai asher le'ol moed. Vayal alav el olot aleph. He brought a massive amount of korbanot. So on the one hand, and it's very comforting, Shlomo HaMelech is going to use the kelim that survived from the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu built in this week's parsha. On the other hand, says our Haftara, Vayaviu haKohanim et Aron Brit Adonai el Mikamo El Devir Habayit, El Kodesh HaKodashim, El Tachat Kanfei HaKruvim. He brought the Aron Tachat Kanfei HaKruvim. That doesn't make that much sense. Ki HaKruvim Porsim Knafaim El Makom HaAron. Right, the Kruvim were outstretched arms covering the Makom of the Aron. Vayasoku HaKruvim Al HaAron Va'al Bodav Milamala. You get the sense, and it's the truth. You'll see it in other psukim. It's not the Aron and the Kruvim on it. The Kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech built for the Beis HaMikdash were part of the fixtures of the Beis HaMikdash. Part of the Kodesh HaKodashim had these enormous winged things. They're not facing each other, they're facing in a slightly different direction. And underneath those Kruvim is where you put the Aron. Right? They're different Kruvim than the Kruvim that we're used to and that are described in this week's parsha. What does that mean? It means that Shlomo HaMelech, on the one hand, had the insight and understood that he needed to use the kelim that Moshe Rabbeinu built. That for us, that makes us comfortable, that makes us feel familiar with the Beis HaMikdash, makes us feel like all of our focus in Truma and Tetzaveh and Vayakhel Pekudei was not for waste. These are the kelim that are going to carry the Beis HaMikdash. On the other hand, he included then, so just a warning, hopefully we'll be fine. He included then, in the Beit HaKabayis, all the money that his father, David HaMelech, had gathered, as we read in the first pasuk, and then he made additions to the Beis HaMikdash as he saw fit. And in a way, right, we know that there were multiple menorahs and multiple shulchanot. In a way, Shlomo HaMelech is being innovative, but also being true to the Masorah. He's using the kelim that Moshe made, and then he's making additions, and he's adding to it, and he's filling the place. You have to realize, the Mishkan was like a shtibel compared to the Beis HaMikdash, which was like, the great synagogue or something. It had much more space, and Shlomo HaMelech wanted to fill that space. But on the other hand, Shlomo HaMelech didn't, God forbid, want to turn his back on all the things that we've been learning about in the parshos that we've been reading now. And so he balanced those things. He used those kelim and he added to them. Not to the actual kelim themselves. The kelim themselves were in the dimensions and as described in Truma and Tetzaveh and Vayakhel and Pekudei. But he made massive kruvim on top. He made additional kelim. He balanced our history and our past and our connection to those things with the needs of the current generation. And of course, showing respect to his father David by using the money that David had collected for the Beit HaKabayis. Okay. One more question. What was in the Kodesh HaKodashim? Now, why does it matter, you might say to me? It doesn't really matter. It simply matters to me personally when I close my eyes and I imagine myself standing in the Kodesh HaKodashim. I want to know what's there. So the Haftara says in Pasuk Chet, Ein ba'aron rak shnei luchot ha'avanim asher hiniach sham Moshe b'chorev asher karat Adonai im b'nei Yisrael b'tzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim. Now the pasuk, which at first glance looks very, very clear, there was nothing in the Aron except for the luchos, the second luchos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe. But there's also another way to read the pasuk, and it's machlokas hamefarshim. Ein ba'aron rak. It's a double negative, right? There was nothing in except. So what other things would have been included? So the answer is the pasuk might be referring to the shivrei haluchos, right? The luchos that Moshe broke, the first luchos, were also someplace. Wouldn't it be nice if they were in the Aron, right? Also, there's the Sefer Torah that Moshe wrote. The psukim again in Lamed Aleph and Devarim. Vahi kechalot Moshe lichtov et divrei Torah azot al Sefer ad tumam. Vayitzav Moshe et haleviyim nosei Aron brit Adonai lemor lo koach et Sefer Torah hazeh v'samtem oto mitzad Aron brit Adonai Elohechem v'haya sham b'chol la'ed. So you could say, okay, the psukim say you put it next to the Aron. It's possible. It's just really a question for when I close my eyes and imagine the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Since Senet Haman was there, the Mate Aharon was there, the Shemen HaMishcha was there. The question is, were they on the floor next to the Aron, or were they in the Aron themselves? Okay, and now we come to the last point for today. And that is the high point of the Haftarah and the high point of our Parsha, and that's the Gilui Shechina, Ki'ilu, when the Mishkan is finished and the Shechina comes down, when the Beit Hamikdash is finished and the Shechina comes down, that the Ramban describes as the high point of Sefer Shemot, right? The Ramban talks about Sefer Shemot is called the Sefer HaGeulah, but what redemption is the term talking about? The Ramban points out correctly. If it's talking about Yitzias Mitzrayim, so then you can schlep it out to B'Shalach, but that's only half the parashos in Shmos. So the Ramban, no. When we got out of Mitzrayim, we were just in the desert. There was nothing. When we built a Beit Hamikdash, which was, in the Ramban's word, a mini Gilui Shechina of Har Sinai, right, a recreation of the Gilui Shechina of Har Sinai, then we return to Ma'alat Avotenu. Then we turn to the level beforehand when HaKadosh Baruch Hu lives amongst us. And that's an amazing thing. So the Pasuk says in our Haftarah, Vahi b'tzeit ha'kohanim min ha'kodesh, v'ha'anan malei et Beit Adonai, v'lo yachlu ha'kohanim la'amod l'sharet mipnei ha'anan, ki malei kvod Adonai et Beit Adonai. Right? Literally, the Kohanim couldn't serve because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was there. Technically, there was no room. That was the Gilui Shechina. It's very, very reminiscent of the Gilui Shechina in Parshas Yisrael, where the Torah tells us that Har Sinai, Vayishkon kvod Adonai al Har Sinai, Vayichaseu ha'anan sheishet yamim, Vayikra al Moshe b'yom ha'shvim mitoch ha'anan. Even more than that, it sounds like the Gilui Shechina or the Hashras HaShechina in our Parsha. At almost the very end of our Parsha in Perek Mem, says the Torah, Vayichas ha'anan et Ohel Moed, Uchvod Adonai malei et HaMishkan. Right? I don't know exactly what that means. It's beyond us. But God's presence was there. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el Ohel Moed, ki shachan alav ha'anan, Uchvod Adonai malei et HaMishkan. Exactly the same as we read in Haftarah. V'lo yachlu ha'kohanim la'amod l'sharet b'nei ha'anan. Why? Ki malei kvod Hashem Beit Hashem. So obviously you have to ask yourself, what's going on? Why is it that man can't go into the Ohel Moed because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there? Is there no room? So first of all, just one more parallel. Says the Psukim in Divrei Hayom in Divrei Hayom Bet Perek Zayin, Ukechalot Shlomo lehitpalel, right? Just to make the scene more vivid for us. V'ha'esh yarda mehashamayim v'tochal ha'olah v'hazvachim b'chvod Adonai malei et habayit. Just like we read in this week's parsha. V'lo yachlu ha'kohanim lavo al Beit Adonai ki malei kvod Adonai et Beit Adonai. It was full of the Shechina. V'chol b'nei Yisrael rim beredet ha'esh v'chvod Adonai al habayit ויכרעו אפיים ארצה על הרצפה, וישתחוו והודות לאדוני כי טוב כי לעולם חסדו. What a great moment. So we're not going to talk about, because it's above my pay grade, what does it mean that God's presence was there? But we can ask the question of Lo Yachol Moshe Lavo Al Moed. Why not? So there's two possibilities, right? Out of an overwhelming respect for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu's there, so Moshe Rabbeinu can't be there, right? I can't go into this room because this gadol is sitting there. It's his room. It's not my room. The other possibility is that literally the Shekhinah is taking up all the space in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, how would that work? So maybe, and I'm just suggesting this, maybe it has something to do with the Kabbalistic idea of tzimtzum, right? If you've ever heard this idea, when God wanted to create the world, he had to be mitzamtzeim himself. He had to limit himself, to confine himself, so that there would be room for me and you. And it could be that somehow Kiviyachol HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Ohel Moed had to do the same exact thing. He had to be mitzamtzeim himself, because otherwise, v'lo yachlu hakanim lavo al Ohel Moed ki malei kvod Hashem et Beit Hashem. There would be no room for them. Okay, now, postscript, which is a significant part of our Haftara, but the postscript is Shlomo HaMelech's speech. And this brings us back to the issue we talked about at the beginning of this year, which is the role of David HaMelech in the creation of the Beis HaMikdash. Says Shlomo, says the Psukim, Vayasev HaMelech et panav, vayivach et kol kahal Yisrael, v'chol kahal Yisrael omeid. Vayomer Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael, asher diber befiv et David avi, ubiyado milei lemor. Right? Shlomo HaMelech, having rejected his father's collection of materials for the Beis HaMikdash, now gives his father all the credit. Min hayom asher hotzeiti tamid Yisrael mitzrayim lo bacharti b'ir mikol shiftei Yisrael livnot bait liyot shmi sham va'evchar b'David liyot alami Yisrael. Not Shlomo, David. Vahi im levav David avi livnot bait l'shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael. All David. Vayomer Adonai el David avi ya'ana shehayom levavcha livnot bait l'shmi hetivota ki hayom levavecha. It was great you had this idea. Rakata lo tivna bait. Ki mincha yotze mechalotzecha hu yivna bayit lishmi, vayakem Adonai et divaro asher diber, va'akum tachat David avi, va'eshev al kisei Yisrael kasher diber Adonai, va'evne habayit l'shem Adonai Elohei Yisrael. All of a sudden, it's not habayit asher bana Shlomo, it's habayit asher bana David. Shlomo is here as David's son, not in his own stead. Right? It's very similar in Perek Lamed of Tehillim. Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid. Why Habayit LeDavid? Why is not Shlomo? The answer is no. It sounds like the Beis HaMikdash was David HaMelech's idea. I have to say this carefully because I don't want to be such a big kofar. Right? The idea of limiting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's also in Haftara, the idea of Yerushalayim being God's city, it's limiting. The idea of the Beis HaMikdash being God's place, it's limiting. Why isn't Melacha Etz Kibodo? That is in fact the case, right? God could have picked Rome, he could have picked Spain, he could have picked Teaneck, New Jersey, he could have picked any place. So yes, there is a beauty to Yerushalayim and there's a value to Yerushalayim, and there's something inherent in Yerushalayim. But the sense you get, I'm just suggesting that the sense you get is that it was David HaMelech's idea. David HaMelech wanted Yerushalayim to be the capital of the Jewish people. And David HaMelech wanted the Beis HaMikdash to be the Makom Menuchas HaShechina. And it might not have otherwise been that way. But David HaMelech wanted it. And that's why in davening and when reference to the Beis HaMikdash, we always think of it as the thing that David HaMelech built. In practice, Shlomo built it. But L'maisa, it wasn't just David's idea, it was his dream. It is what he wanted more than anything. When God told him he couldn't do it, it was painful to him. But he understood that wasn't his role. And yet, despite the fact that he didn't actually build it with his own hands, he gets credit for it because it was his idea and it was his dream. Okay, that's what I have for this week. Yashkach to everybody, Shabbat Shalom, and see you, God willing, next week.